Back when I hated myself enough to go on Tinder and Bumble dates, I could always count on this obligatory question from my date if she didn't work in tech. What is a UX designer? Now, I'm not saying you hate yourself if you use Tinder or Bumble or one of those other stupid dating apps, because maybe you even found the one using one of those. I'm just saying I'm using hindsight bias to say that I'm an idiot for having ever tried it, so you could kindly unthumbs down me if I unnecessarily attacked you a moment ago. Okay, so now we've come to the most obvious question that surrounds UX design, which of course is, what is it? UX design stands for user experience design because apparently UE wouldn't have sounded nearly as cool as UX. There are many different definitions of UX design, but this is the most concise way I could put it. I define UX design as the practice of crafting interaction between human users and a product. So, what exactly is that product? Well, admittedly, the product can be anything because basically anything that you interact with on a daily basis has a user experience, but the term is generally associated with technology, mainly computer technology or anything that uses computer technology. That's why whenever someone asks me what I do for a living, I just tell them I design apps and websites for a living because I'm an introvert and that's the quickest way I could get them off my back and in the social interaction. Speaking of interactions. But what does a UX designer really do? Well, depending on the source, you might get anywhere from 5 to 7 design phases. I've outlined 6 of them. The first and arguably most important phase is user research because before you do anything, you're going to need data. And this is the phase where you study the behaviors and motivations of your users to figure out what they need in order to accomplish their goals. And you're going to use this need to identify potential product solutions that exist within the market you're targeting. During the user research phase, you will have identified common characteristics and behaviors among the people you studied, and you're going to use these findings to create user personas, which represent key user groups for whom you're designing. And these personas are going to outline motivations and goals among your potential users. And you could even use these personas to create narrative storyboards that illustrate how this product is going to fit into their daily lives. The next phase is information architecture, which is basically the logical structure of the website or app. This usually comes in the form of a sitemap, which shows where the user is, where the user wants to go, and how the user will get there. Once the information architecture gets finalized, you, the UX designer, will create a set of wireframes, which is a collection of two-dimensional layouts of each screen within the website or app. And you could think of these layouts as simple representations that illustrate where all of the blocks of information and interaction points go. So think of this as sort of the skeleton of the design that the visual designers can use to create mock-ups that look a lot closer to what the final product will be. Once you've tossed the finalized wireframes over the fence to the visual designers will return a set of mockups you can use to build a prototype from. And a prototype is a clickable representation of how the final product will look and feel. Now it's time to put the prototype in the hands of users, and I don't know why I wrote this next part in this part of the script instead of the prototype section a moment ago, but the prototype can either be a simple version built by you or a coded version built by the developers. Either way, this is where you'll observe how users use your product so you can gather any extra data that you can use to fix any potential problems before the final product gets released. So, why is UX design important? Well, it's very simple. If a company doesn't optimize the user experience of its products, then the users of those products are simply going to use a competitor's products. Next section. Now let's talk about the tools of the trade because of course UX designers need software to crank out the deliverables for each of the phases that we just talked about. So here is a list of commonly used programs for UX designers, and there are likely way more than even what you see here. So tools like InVision, Sketch, and Figma, those are industry standards. Those are very commonly used, but there are other industry standards on this list. The important thing to note is that they allow you to do 2 basic things: design and prototyping. So the design portion of these apps basically enable you to lay out the elements of each screen within your within your website or app. And the prototype version allows you to take the elements of each of those screens and connect them to other screens within the app, so you could create a clickable prototype that you could put in front of your users. Now let's talk about job titles, because in the UX field there are plenty of titles that are similar to UX designer. They're not all exactly the same, but there is quite a bit of overlap in the responsibilities and duties of each of those jobs. So let's begin with experience designer, which is basically the same as a UX designer, except for the companies that list this just remove the user part. I've most often seen this job title posted by Adobe, but I've also seen it posted by Salesforce and Bank of America. If you read the job listing, it's pretty much the same as what you would read in a UX designer listing. Then there's interaction designer, which, based on the job listings I've read, has a one-to-one overlap with UX designer. And it's important to note that interaction design, also known as IXD, is not in and of itself UX design. It's a component of UX design. And since interaction design is also known as IXD, sometimes interaction designers are referred to as IXDs, because, of course, in the tech industry, everyone loves their weird acronyms. The company that I've seen list this title most often is Google, though other companies definitely have the interaction designer title. In fact, my first ever full-time job within the industry was associate interaction designer, also known as a junior interaction designer. Web designer. This one's pretty self-explanatory. It's someone who plans and lays out websites, and it's also someone whose job title is becoming extinct because it's being absorbed by UX designer. Moving on to user interface designer, also known as a UI designer. This is someone who creates visual mockups and visual assets for a digital interface. And this is also someone whose job title is becoming extinct because in recent years it's been absorbed by visual designer and art director. Then there's the UI UX designer, which of course combines UI design with UX design, in case you somehow did not get that from the title. This was a common job title back in the early days of modern UX in the early 2010s, but in recent years has been replaced by the next title on this list. Product designer. The product designer title is taking over the field of UX and seems to be the most common job title I see listed as of today. A product designer combines UX design skills with visual design and product strategy, and they remain involved in product development throughout the life cycle of a project. Now, this job title combines a bunch of different design disciplines, so it's no wonder why it's a popular one for companies within the tech industry to hire for. After all, why pay a bunch of different designers when you could pay just one? Now let's talk about the 3 basic things you'll need to become a UX designer. The first, most important, and probably the only one that's 100% absolutely necessary is a portfolio of projects showcasing your UX design work. And these projects are also known as case studies. The second thing you'll most likely need is a 4-year degree that may or may not be related to design, at least if you want to work in the corporate world. Now, there might be some companies that will let you slide on the 4-year degree requirement, especially if you have experience to compensate, but just warning you that a 4-year degree is a common gatekeeper requirement in the corporate world. Speaking of experience is not a formal requirement, but anecdotally it took me forever to get my foot in the door, which meant that experience was effectively a requirement, and it probably still is effectively a requirement for many of you up-and-coming UX designers. Now, obviously every current UX designer eventually had to get lucky and be given a chance when they didn't have any prior experience. That's probably why boot camps have gotten really popular in recent years, but I can't really speak to those because I've never actually signed up for one. But despite my lack of knowledge of UX boot camps, I suppose I could add this as a 4th how to become a designer thing to this list. Based on my understanding, you sign up for a UX design course that lasts weeks or months. I think they cost a lot. I think they cost tens of thousands of dollars or something like that. And hopefully what you get out of it while you're working on projects that you'll likely work on as an industry pro is, some skills that you could take from it, some portfolio projects, and, maybe some stupid certificate at the end of it. Now, would you look at that? I've reached the conclusion section of the script. So this is the best I could do as far as explaining the basics of UX design. Now, obviously, each component of this topic can be broken down into its own separate video deep dive, but there's an obvious reason why I began with this UX design overview video.